Well, the time has come. We are speaking to the next executive producer for broadcasting and production at University of Cincinnati, Trevor Towle. But Trevor has done so much great work in the past at ESPN, was there for over 18 years. And in this conversation, I'm Bryan Fenley with ESPN Volleyball and other networks doing sports. We're going to share Trevor's story, Trevor Towle's story, in a way where it's not going to be a look at me operation here, because what he has done, so much of it has been in a team setting. But this is a place to inspire other people by what he has done and talk about his life from a career standpoint and also from a personal standpoint. Trevor, you've heard all of this. I know you're up for the challenge. I'm excited to have you on.
Thanks, Bryan. I really appreciate you having me on, and excited to tell my story and help those young folks out there that want to get their foot in the door in television. And it's been a great career that I look forward to continuing at Cincinnati. You know, after, like you mentioned, 18 years at ESPN, I'm making the jump. Last Friday was my last day with the company, and I will start at Cincinnati on March 6th. So moving all my stuff from Charlotte up to Cincinnati and looking forward to the next chapter of my career.
Let me ask you this before we really get started. How's the move coming along with all the packing that you're doing and all of that?
It's a lot. It's a whirlwind. We've been in Charlotte for about 15 years. I'm an Ohio native. I was born and raised in Dayton, Ohio, and went to Ohio University, but been down in the South for most of my career, and going back home to Ohio. So it's exciting. My girls are going to stay here with my wife and finish the school year while I go get started, and then come join me in the summer. So we're in the process of selling a house, buying a house, packing everything up. It's definitely a whirlwind, but I'm glad both my daughters are able to finish the school year, finish their sports, and we'll hopefully get settled pretty quickly once we get up there.
Well, you mentioned your daughters and that they're into sports. That instantly gets me thinking, Trevor, what kind of sports dad are you when you're watching them in their athletic pursuits?
Definitely involved when I can be. As a lot of my coworkers and people in the business know, it's not always easy to be at every event when you work in television. You give up nights and weekends, you travel. So because of that, I've never really been able to be a head coach and run a team because I can't make that commitment. But I always offer my services to be an assistant coach. And I love being on the sidelines, cheering my girls on. I have a 7-year-old and a 10-year-old. My 10-year-old, she has been a swimmer year round and then alternates seasons with basketball and softball. And my youngest daughter, Jordan, she plays basketball and softball as well. So my wife's pretty busy, shuttle them all around town. And whenever I'm in town, I'm either at the games cheering with her in the stands or on the sidelines. But very vocal and active. We have a competitive household. We play a lot of 2-on-2 and 21 out in the driveway. And both my girls are really competitive with each other. So look forward to seeing what opportunities they have in the future. And if sports is their direction, they seem to enjoy it. So you don't want to push them too hard, but it's great that they love to play sports that I've covered my whole career.
Who wins at these at-home competitions?
Usually my 10-year-old. She's a sneaky one. She likes to bend the rules a little, and as a dad, I don't want to beat her up too much. So for a while there, I was letting her win, but I'm getting to the point now where I might not be able to beat her even if I want to. So it's fun competition, and I've been very blessed to have two little girls that they're smart, they're great at sports, and they enjoy all the family activities we do. So just trying to hold on to those memories while I can, and make the most of them.
You've also created so many memories at ESPN. We'll touch on those in a moment, but you're talking about the family. What has been your family dynamic look like since you grew up, and what beyond the nuclear family that you have at home right now with your wife and two daughters and yourself, but your own childhood and what that looked like for you? What was that like?
Sure. A lot of people might not know this about me, but I'm actually the oldest of 10 kids.
Wow.
My mom did not have 10 kids. My mom and dad were divorced when I was 2 years old. We were in Dayton, Ohio, and they both remarried. And through remarriages, they had 9 more children. So I've been really lucky to, I have a great support system. I feel like I'm kind of, a leader for the family. A lot of my brothers and sisters look up to me, and my parents have always been there for me. I'm very close with my mom and my stepdad and my father, and we have a great relationship. They didn't always understand what this TV business was like or why I went this direction, but they've been very supportive and very proud of me. And having all those brothers and sisters, most of them up in Ohio, having a big family, down south and up in Ohio is great. So one of the big reasons of moving back to Cincinnati was I've got brothers and sisters up there that have children the same age as my kids. So an
Oh,
opportunity to go up there and work for UC, but also a support system for me and my wife with our children, and be able to spend time with the grandparents and with cousins and aunts and uncles. So it's a really special homecoming for us to go back to UC.
what a full circle event for your family. Trevor Towle is with me. I'm Bryan Fenley. So you talked about maybe a lot of your family growing up, they didn't know a whole lot about the TV business. And as you're working your way into it, as we start to look at the beginnings of your career that was taking shape, you go out to Los Angeles and you're doing this internship. What kind of belief in yourself did that take from somebody like you said, who's from the Midwest in Ohio University and going to school there, to say, hey, I am just going to uproot from where I am, do something completely different, and take this big risk?
That's a big part of the advice I give young people when I work in the school control rooms and get to meet young people that want to work in television is you've got to take risks. You've got to sometimes make a leap outside of your comfort zone, take a job you don't want, sometimes just to get that next job and get your foot in the door. But for me, I'll back up a little bit. I went to college at Ohio University, and I originally went there to be a doctor. I was studying pre-med for 2 years. And after a couple of experiences in some hospitals that weren't too flattering, I decided that the medical profession wasn't for me. My stepdad's an anesthesiologist. I grew up around hospitals, and as a kid, always thought that's what I wanted to do. But as most college kids do, I changed my mind in the middle of college, and I changed my major from pre-med to telecommunications. And my parents were like, "What are you doing? Like, what is telecommunications? What is this?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to go to LA and be a filmmaker. I want to make movies." One of my roommates told me in college, he said, all the Tarantino movies, you're a huge movie buff. You should go to LA and make movies. I said, that's what I'm going to do. So bit of a pipe dream, but my senior year, I was waiting tables in a summer job up on Lake Erie at a place called the Catawba Island Yacht Club. And it was a lot of wealthy people with big boats and yachts that came in there for fine dining. I was wearing my suit and tie. And there was a couple there I waited on all summer, and they asked me, they said, "Trevor, you've been great, but what do you do? What are your plans for college?" And I told them, I said, "Well, my goal is to move out to Los Angeles and make movies." And their eyes lit up. And they said, "Our son owns a production company out in Los Angeles called Rocket Science Laboratories." I said, "Really?" They said, "Well, here's our phone number. Give us a call. We'll set you up with our son, and he'll give you a phone call back." One day I was driving to work, and my phone rang, and it was this gentleman out in Los Angeles, and he said, "Hey, I don't offer internships for course credit, but I'll give you a paid internship if you want to move out here." So I packed up my beat up Ford Taurus, and I drove from Ohio all the way to Los Angeles and found an apartment in Koreatown off of Cahuenga Boulevard, just because it was close to the office. Not the safest place in the world, probably not the best place for a young kid to go move to, but made it work. And I worked on with Rocket Science Laboratories. Their first big show was Temptation Island, and at the time I didn't know what Temptation Island was. I was a production assistant. They had me, filling coffee, making copies. But whenever a final episode was done, I would drive over to the Fox studio lot and deliver that copy that would air that night on Fox. And our very first night on the air, it was the #1 show in the country. And I didn't even know what it was. Like, I wasn't going to Belize and shooting in exotic locations. I was in the post-production house as a PA. After a few months of a lot of success and learning a lot about the business, the show was over. And they had also done a show called Joe Millionaire that was pretty popular on Fox, but they didn't have any projects ready for me to work on. They said, "Well, we've got a friend at MTV if you'd be interested in going to work at MTV." And of course, back then, MTV wasn't still playing music videos, but to my childhood, that was a big deal. And I got in with a production company that did post-production for MTV, and we did shows like Snowed In at Big Bear Mountain with Jennifer Lopez and Mandy Moore, Spring Break in Cancun, all of those like specialty holiday shows that MTV aired. And I got to work on those and meet some of those celebrities, and it was an awesome opportunity. And after about 9 months went by, I had a chance to stay on for a full-time position or go back home, and I hadn't finished my degree. And my mom was like, "You're 3.5 years in, you better come back and finish this college degree." So I came back, finished my degree, and long story short, I ended up going down to Atlanta where my dad was and working for a production company there instead of going back to Los Angeles. But networking is so important in this business, and all the people I've met in my career have all kind of been like one lily pad to the next of opportunities, and you just never know who you're going to meet or who might give you that next opportunity. And the sports production world in general is a small world, so always network and keep those contacts, because you never know who you're going to run into again down the road that may be a big part of your career. So that's my story about Los Angeles and working for Rocket Science Laboratories. But it was a pretty big leap, and I'm glad I did it because it opened up a lot of doors. And I never would have probably gotten my job at ESPN if it wasn't for having those jobs on my resume.
Well, as those doors started to open from that internship and beyond, one of the people who you met was Chris Farrow.
Yep.
And obviously there are so many people who you've had the pleasure of working for who have been at ESPN, whether now or in the past. And when you first met him, what did he see in you?
Well, it's funny. We met at an NHRA pool party. I was working as a freelancer for NHRA drag racing. A guy by the name of Eric Swearingen gave me my first shot. I had met him through a production company in Atlanta, and we were working on a racing series on Speed Channel together with the company I was at. And he said, "Hey, I'm going to work for ESPN and the NHRA. I'm going to be their lead producer. Would you like to come work with me? I need an assistant director." And he said, "You can stay in Atlanta where you're at, but if you move to Charlotte, you'll be able to get a lot more work." So I moved to Charlotte. I met Sean Murphy, Chris Farrow, Bruce Watson, all the people that were overseeing the NHRA, Joe Baker, and they just all took me under their wing. I was a very green. I mean, I had worked in some stuff out in LA, but I'd never worked in sports television. And as a sports fan, I just never thought of that as a career. And they brought me into the racing world, and I learned so much from all of them. But they introduced me to Chris Farrow. He was new to Charlotte at the time. I had only been in Charlotte for a short time, and we just kind of bonded by being the new guys at ESPN. I was a freelancer at the time, and he said, "Hey, when you're not doing NHRA, I'd love to have you doing as much college basketball as possible." So I started off as an associate director, kind of built my name in the business as being one of the really thorough ADs that was always buttoned up and ready to go, and spent 9 months of the year on the NHRA drag racing and the rest doing college basketball. And that's how I met Chris, and he was a big part of my career and getting me opportunities with ESPN doing basketball, just like so many other people you've interviewed that had their opportunities through meeting Chris and other great people at ESPN.
Trevor Towle is with me. I'm Bryan Fenley. The opportunities continued at ESPN, and as you mentioned, it would come with more responsibilities for you and promotions and more work as you continue to build up your confidence in the eyes of your peers and what you could do at ESPN and beyond. And then obviously with SEC Network and one of the other things that you spent so much time with and on. One of the biggest things that the SEC Network has done and other college networks and ESPN's relationship to these conferences is the ability to be able to produce so much content at the schools through their own control rooms and the projects that are behind that, which, look, you were a part of. Now, there was a grand, vast team around you. So, excuse me, there were so many people that were a part of this. But for you to take on with your colleagues this ahead of its time project, what did the landscape of that look like for you in being able to create, implement such a change in the way that sports television is consumed and where we get it from?
Sure. Well, the beginning of the school control room project with ESPN really did launch with the SEC Network. And at the time, you mentioned Chris Farrow. I was freelancing a ton for ESPN, really year round when I wasn't doing NHRA, doing college basketball. And I talked to John Vasallo about moving over and getting off of the NHRA to go work for college football. I really had a passion to produce football. And I just gotten basically my release papers saying, "Okay, you can leave NHRA and go chase this college football dream." And at that time, there were 2 project producer jobs that popped up on the SEC Network that Meg Aronowitz and Steve Ackles were hiring for. And Chris Farrow just happened to walk by Meg's office one day, and she said, "Hey, I got something for you. Do you know any local people that may be interested in a part-time?" It was called a project producer role. So it was basically an 18-month contract where after that 18 months you'd be let go. It was a temporary. They needed headcount. They needed people to work on the SEC Network. So Chris threw my name out to Meg. She said, "Well, he's doing NHRA." He said, "No, he's actually been released from NHRA. He's going over to college football, but you might be able to steal him." And she went and talked to JV, said, "Yeah, that sounds like a great opportunity for him to get a staff producer job." And Meg called me and interviewed me. I went and had coffee with Steve Ackles and talked with him. And the next day they hired me as a staff producer. Long story short, that 18-month project producer role, they hired myself and Andy Green, who's a coordinating producer at ESPN now. The 2 of us ended up being the first guys to work in those school control rooms before there was a school control room project. And fast forward to the 18 months later, they ended up signing both of us on full time and giving us full contracts. So we went from project producers to full time producers. But in those early years, we produced some of the very first live linear events out of these school control rooms. We always knew they were going to do SEC Plus digital shows, but there really wasn't a plan in place for them to do linear product. And as we started to realize these control rooms are really good, with a little bit of help and a little bit of mentoring, we can get them up to speed to do linear events out of these rooms. So I did one of the first volleyball matches ever out of a control room in Missouri, and all the SEC schools started to step up one by one. And as a team with Scott Heck, Meg Aronowitz, Brian Bell, Andy Green, myself, Rich Shepler, we all were the original like 5 or 6 people on this project, and we were overseeing the entire project from, everything at ESPN was on Viz at the time, and they had this thing called Expression that a lot of people didn't know much about. We had to get all the graphics and elements transferred over to Expression and basically build this project from the ground up. So I was in the right place at the right time, very lucky to work with some very smart and creative people, and it created what we have now with the School Control Room project that we're doing with the SEC, ACC, American, and Big 12, over 45 different schools that are doing live linear events for ESPN now, instead of us rolling TV trucks to site.
When you consider, Trevor, all that you've already done in this business, and you then look at the project that you had worked on with the schools in what you were able to do on that front, where does that stand as far as your greatest achievements and collaborative projects that you've been able to put your fingerprints on?
I'd say number one, it's right there at the top. I'd spent a lot of years on the road, traveling away from my family, living out of hotels, and I was starting to get a little burnt out by the business. It was a lot of work, a lot of travel. And when I was able to become a part of the School Control Room project with my team at ESPN, it really reinvigorated me, because it gave me this opportunity to start mentoring and teaching young people and working with college students. And when you see their passion and how involved they were and how much they wanted to work in the business, it made me realize again how lucky I was to be working for ESPN and getting paid to cover live sports. And it just brought back that passion all over again. And getting to be a mentor to a lot of these students in these schools was one of the best honors I've ever had in my career. And to see so many of them now working at ESPN, working at Fox, working at Disney, all over the industry, this School Control Room project has become a pipeline into the production world, where students now are coming out with 4 or 5 years of full-time production experience. I mean, when I was in college, we read books about television. We didn't get much hands-on experience. I wasn't working live events in a control room, that's for sure. So the world has changed quite a bit, but I'm really proud to have been a part of that beginning step. And I got to give credit to all the schools more than anything, because they're the ones that make it work. ESPN has been a partner and helped facilitate a lot, but all these staff members and students that work at all the schools in the SEC, ACC, all the conferences that have school control rooms, they work so hard. They do 6-7 games a week, sometimes multiple games a day. And there's so much passion and work that goes into putting these sports on the air. And they're the backbone of what the network has become with college sports. I mean, they do so many of our productions for Olympic sports. And we used to think they would never do college football. Now they're doing, I think, 40 to 60 college football games a year out of school control rooms, which is a whole nother beast. A good friend of mine, Evan Cohen, oversees a lot of that with our company. And got to throw out Dan Cole's name as well. He's been very instrumental. He wasn't one of the original members, but man, he's been a very valuable member to the team. And we have a group of about 18 folks on our school control room team. So I can't say all their names, but they know who they are, and they're great friends. And everybody's contributed to building this from what it was from day one to where it is now. And it's something that is, really saved ESPN through the pandemic by keeping live sports on the air. There was a while we were using the Unity and Zoom apps to oversee live events from home, because ESPN put on a traveling freeze. So we couldn't go out and go to events. So these schools did what we call level 3 productions. A level 3 is where we don't send in anybody other than announcers, which are usually announcers from home, where the schools covered all these broadcasts themselves through the pandemic and really kept college sports on the air, which was a huge tribute to all of them.
Yeah, just to hear the way you break it down, unless you're working in the nitty gritty, I don't think that the casual television sports fan realizes the kind of work that you and your team had to do, and the gravity of the situation that you the undertaking of it, and how much it lent itself to bridging that time, like you said, during the early stages of COVID, where there were the traveling freezes and everything like that, and the way in which you and your team were able to be collaborative and get ahead to allow people to have that diversion when everybody was kind of at home and all of that during the early times of COVID. But I wanted to ask you this because obviously with all the experiences in the control room, that had to have caught the eye of Cincinnati. So they see what you've done and what your team has done at ESPN and the control room project, working with the different schools and the different conferences. And then Cincinnati comes calling. What did they say to you when they reached out?
Well, we had a prior relationship because I had worked with the American in their school control room. So this basketball season, just recently, I produced I think 3 live events out of their control room. But the previous year, we did a couple of the first ever events, linear events out of their control room, where they got to know me. I got to know their facility. So in between last year and this year, I'd say probably around November, they posted their executive producer role, and they found out that I was an Ohio native, and I had a really good relationship with their staff, Joe Brackman and Matt Noonan, who oversee the facility, Anthony DeFino, deputy athletic director, who was the one that hired me, and then their athletic director, John Cunningham. They all pursued me pretty hard and wouldn't take no for an answer. And at first it was, the housing market right now is tough. I'm very comfortable. I was just recently promoted to senior managing producer. I love my job. I love working with the students and really enjoy the life I've built down here in Charlotte. But like I said, they wouldn't take no for an answer. And it all just kind of became clear that this was the next step for me, and an opportunity to be an executive producer at a school control room is just a natural evolution from where I've been. And, I look forward to helping make Cincinnati one of the best control rooms in the Big 12 when they join the Big 12 next year. We got a lot of work in front of us to do, but good people and a strong support system there. So it's for me, it's going to be working with ESPN as a partner now. So I'm not completely going away from ESPN. My paychecks won't be coming from ESPN, but I'll still be doing live linear productions out of our facility for ESPN, and be a partner with them in the Big 12.
It goes without saying that this was a home run hire, but you're also going to miss your relationships. Well, they will be preserved, obviously, when you take on this new role. But when you think about what you're going to miss at ESPN, the relationships that maybe day to day you spoke with people every day, and now with the new job, that might be a bit different. But what are you going to hold on to, the nostalgia side of you, the most from your nearly 2 decades at ESPN?
Definitely the people. All the people that I've met, all those great television minds that have molded me, and I've learned from. Whether it were people I worked with on live events or just being on company-wide conference calls, on sports-specific launch calls, just learning how everybody does television. A big thing that we do at ESPN when we do our calls, we like to share feedback on games, big moments, controversial plays, challenging situations. And that's something I've always enjoyed sharing with the school control rooms as well. But how do you handle these challenging situations when you're in the moment? And I've learned so much from my colleagues and other producers and coordinating producers and directors on how to handle these tough moments, whether it's like the Damar Hamlin incident that happened with the Bills and Bengals game. I thought ESPN did a fantastic job covering that. But there's right and wrong ways. There's a lot of different things you can learn from other people's successes and their mistakes. And I thought at the company, we all shared those experiences with each other quite a bit, and frequently through conference calls and sport calls, where you got to learn from some of the greats, people doing Monday Night Football and doing these huge events. So I'll miss that kind of camaraderie and some really good friends that I know I'll still be in touch with and work with in a different way through Cincinnati. But yeah, I'll miss the people. It's been an awesome 18 years, and I wouldn't be where I'm at or who I am if it weren't for all those personal interactions and all those opportunities that the company gave me.
That's so well said. I want to leave you with this last question. Trevor Towle is with me. I'm Bryan Fenley. You just talked about how so many people who you worked with at ESPN meant the world to you and played such a big part into your own personal growth. Where does your wife come in as far as the way she has played a role in your personal growth as well?
My wife's fantastic. Her name's Sue, and she has supported me from day one. when I told her that I wanted to be in this business, she actually, I was a starving artist, and she bought me my first camera that I shot a documentary with before I worked for ESPN.
Wow.
So from day one, she's believed in me. She's put up with me traveling and being gone and missing big family events and coming home and, just turning around, leaving again and packing that suitcase up. And she's always supported me 100%. So when the Cincinnati job came up, we talked about it. She's a Southern girl. She was born and raised in Atlanta and has spent her whole life in the South. And, I left Ohio to get away from the cold, and now we're going back to the cold weather of Ohio. So had to okay that with her. And she told me, she said, I'm proud of you and I support you 100%. So if you think this is the right move, I'm all in. And surprisingly, my daughters were both excited too. I thought they would take it a little harder, but they were so excited to see their grandparents and their cousins and ready to go. So they're at a good age, 7 and 10. Might have been a little harder a few years down the road, but it'll be bittersweet. We've got a lot of great friends and family down here too. But this next chapter in Cincinnati is going to be exciting for me and my family, and just the opportunity to go do what we love near our family at home is just a special opportunity that I'm very, very grateful for.
How awesome is it to have that person in your corner? I think when we look, as we conclude this conversation and we think about what you've done, Trevor, and anybody who has had that work ethic and that desire, they've had to have people in their corners that have believed in them, loved ones. Like, it's so important to the longevity of your career, to the sustainability of your career. And so it wouldn't be telling your story, which we did, without mentioning those at home who help along the way your own growth and the way in which you've been able to maneuver your career with that belief. Like, there's that belief that you have at home and your wife and your kids and your support system, and that has played a big part in what you've done. And I am so excited for you in this next chapter here at Cincinnati. And it, like you said, it comes full circle with your roots in Ohio. You've got family up there. And at the same time, you're still going to be able to continue on that dialogue with ESPN because you're going to be kind of working with them in so many different ways still. Trevor Towle, I'm Bryan Fenley. I've done ESPN volleyball and work with Tennis Channel and other outlets. This has been so much fun, man. Thanks so much for telling this story. I know that you're in the midst of a change in your life and a move, but can't imagine how exciting it must be, and so happy for you.
Thanks, Brian. I'll say I'm a lucky guy, and everything in my career has been from other people, giving me an opportunity. And I just, to people out there that want to work in the business or are already there, it's all about relationships. Take care of those around you and they'll take care of you. It can be a grind and it can be a tough business, but if you keep the people aspect in front of you and treat others the way you want to be treated and pass that mentality along, you'll be just fine. And it's all about networking and making those relationships. But I'm looking forward to going to Cincinnati and building new relationships and helping some of these young students in their careers and finding their place in the television business. But really appreciate you having me on today, and very, very honored to be a guest.